May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. This is one of those gospel stories that can be deceiving because it doesn't seem particularly remarkable. I mean, when Lazarus was saved from the dead, we at least knew all the characters' names, right? We had Lazarus, we knew who Lazarus was, we knew who he was related to, and they got mad at Jesus because he didn't show up on time, and Lazarus had died, and they scolded Jesus and said, if you didn't arrive, if you arrived sooner, he wouldn't have died. And then Jesus is devastated, and he heals him. But with this story, we don't hear any of the names. The only name we really have is the town of Nain. So, of course, I Googled it, because why would I not Google the town of Nain? And, of course, it's entry in Wikipedia. It's still a town to this day. And what makes Nain so remarkable is that there's a Bible story in the Gospel of Luke where a man is healed in the town of Nain. That's it. That's right, not much help. Thanks, Wikipedia. Okay. But like so many passages and stories in the Bible, if we simply spend some time with the text, we had some really neat reflections this week as well, there's a lot of stuff here. And I want to offer you three different vignettes, views of this passage. The first perspective is there's no condemnation in this story. That's remarkable because there almost always is. In most times when somebody dies in the Bible, when somebody gets sick in the Bible, it's always the same. Jesus arrives and somebody says, here's so-and-so, they are sick, they're blind, whatever, and it's because of what they did. It's because of what they did, the sins that they've carried in their life. It's because of the sins of their mother or their father. It's because of the sins of this community. In the story of Lazarus, it was Jesus who should be ashamed for not arriving on time. Every Bible story, with the exception of this one, someone is to be blamed and to be ashamed for something terrible happening. Except for this one, where, for some reason, no one in the town of Nain blames this mother. You know, it's such a classic biblical story, right? This mother with her only son who had this problem. No. Not a single person condemns her for anything she's done. The son has done nothing. We can assume from the story and from the whole village coming out that this son was either beloved or possibly and likely taken before his time. And yet he had done nothing. And Jesus is simply moved with compassion. Compassion for this man and his mother. Compassion for the town who are all grieving together. And there's something very powerful and beautiful about that fact. This is a story about compassion. And the word compassion is translated from the Hebrew as womb love. The love of a mother for that which is in her womb. That's what the word compassion means. It's a beautiful image that we should hold on to because it's amazing how our tradition minimizes the feminine descriptions of God that are filled throughout the Bible. And this is one of those. Whenever God has compassion for us, it is like a mother having compassion for her unborn child. The second image, that's at the end of the story. Fear seized all of them, and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet has risen among us, and God has looked favorably upon his people." We live in a culture that in a lot of ways is blessed for valuing independence and individuals, We have a culture where we talk about being yourself and rejoicing in our individual gifts and liberties. But this is a town who witnessed a man being raised from the dead. And if we were to witness this, we might say something like, he is so blessed to have been visited upon by God, or his mother is so blessed, or his family. What a blessing for his family. And then in brackets, silently, we might think, geez, I wish something like that would happen to my family, or God might visit me in that way. But this is a town where when they saw what happened to this man, they said, God has visited us. We have all experienced a miracle together. God visited a miracle upon me when I saw that man being raised from the dead. Why are we not able to do that as easily? Imagine how enchanted the world would be if you heard about a miraculous healing at the hospital down the street, and you could say, what an incredible miracle happened to me today when I heard of that man or that woman being healed in such a way. What an incredible miracle we can all share together. The third image came to me from my hairdresser. I got a haircut. And one of the neat things about, most of the time I find it's actually really fun for me to tell people what I do, that I'm a priest. But one of the things that was kind of remarkable is he had absolutely no idea what I did for a living. And we were talking about, moving around, and he originally was from Algeria, and he's a Muslim. And we were talking about Canada, and he was talking about Algeria, and of course, we just finished this course, right, on the early Middle Ages, and there's 3 sessions on Islam. So, of course, now, I don't think I know anything about Islam, but now I want to talk about it, right? It's like, I know something. So I wanted to talk, so I was talking a bit about Muslims and prayer, and I said, it's so sensible. It's such a sensible sort of, he's like, yes, of course it is. Yes, it is sensible. It is reasonable. I'm like, okay, good. And he started to teach me. He started to teach me about prayer and the importance of prayer and the value of prayer. And I thought, this is fantastic. Because if he knew I was a priest, he wouldn't have the guts to teach me about prayer. But I missed that. I was like, this is great. And his language that he used about prayer was sort of enchanting in a way. He talked about how we hate to pray. I was like, oh, hate to pray? That's Christian. Jesus wouldn't say that. But he described it in the same way, he described prayer in the same way we would talk about chores. He says God knows that we don't, he's describing how God tells us to pray all the time because he knows we don't want to. In the same way you don't want to eat healthy, we don't want to exercise, we don't want to do all these things. It's like prayer's right on that list, and God knows that it's good for us and that we hate doing it, and yet something goes wrong with us when we don't pray. And so we have a duty to pray. In the same way we have a duty to pay our debts and to eat well and all the rest of it, we have a duty to pray because it helps us become people. It's who we are. God doesn't need us to pray. God knows that we need to pray. I think that's fantastic. Hairdresser. I think he was absolutely right. I just wanted to offer that to you. But the conversation continued. And he started talking about culture. And he was talking about culture in Algeria. And he said the most remarkable thing. He said, I don't like culture. He said, I don't think culture has anything to do with religion. He said, culture has nothing to do with my relationship with God, my family's relationship with God. Culture doesn't help me pray. For him, culture was something that divided people. It was fascinating because as Canadians, we tend to be enchanted by culture. It's possibly because we don't have a lot of culture as a country. We have Tim Hortons commercials and beer commercials, which don't count as Canadian culture. And so we think it's almost like we think it's there's sort of, it's almost like it's something cute or something endearing or something we kind of want, and it's Italy week in Ottawa this week, and I think it's Philippines week next week in Ottawa, and we do our best to sort of, but we don't really get it. And what was remarkable about his story was he was describing the colonial culture. It turns out it was the French colonial power which came into Algeria as opposed to England or Germany or any of the other European powers, but in his country it was France. And France brought their culture, which of course ignited a culture war. And Algerians discovered that Algerians in the north have a different culture than Algerians in the south, and the east have different than west. And they've been fighting over culture for, and he had the exact date, 134 years since the French conquest. And it was remarkable to hear somebody lamenting culture. And I thought about Nain. And one of the great gifts of Nain is the fact that they all were able to celebrate miracles together as one body and one people. One of the challenges, of course, of Nain is if you weren't from Nain, they would know, and they'd think you're weird. And I thought about the blessing of being in Canada. And we often lament the fact that we don't have all this cultural freight. But what's remarkable is we also don't have a lot of people saying, you don't belong here. You're from Blackburn Hamlet. What are you doing in Gloucester? That doesn't happen a lot. Does it, Derek and Gillian? And what that means is when we think about sharing miracles together, there are no obstacles in our way from sharing these miracles with those around us. We don't have our neighbors constantly telling us, you don't belong in this neighborhood. I'm different from you. Look, I'm wearing a purple shirt. That means, look, I have a different tradition that I do in the weekend. We have none of these cultural barriers. And sometimes we can lament not having all this wonderful culture, but there's a gift as well. And being in Canada, as we're walking down the sidewalk, it's minus 55 degrees or however cold it gets here, and we see somebody walking towards us, we don't think, oh, I hope they're from my community. I hope they have the same cultural heritage I do. We think, they must be freezing. This is probably the origins of our lack of culture as Canadians. We just need to bond together. The things like the ice storm. When I was, I'm sure the ice storm was here as well. I'm from southern Ontario, so the ice storm was sort of this cute little, oh, look, it's some ice. We didn't quite get the ice storm thing. But it was incredible, the bond that the calamity of that ice storm brought to the parishes that I was in Montreal. There is something remarkable about the fact that the only thing stopping us from sharing miracles with those around us is us. Is ourselves and our anxiety and fear about sharing love with those we don't know. And that is a gift, because there are other places where there are a lot of obstacles preventing people from loving other people, and especially loving strangers. So I want to share those three things with you, those three ways of seeing this story. First is a story about pure compassion, about womb love, the love God having compassion for us is like a mother having compassion for her unborn child. The town of Nain, who were able to rejoice as if every person in that town had had a miracle visited upon them personally. And this was something that they would carry for the rest of their lives. And that there's nothing preventing us from sharing miracles with those around us but ourselves.